My name's Campbell Martin, and I'd like to talk today about the intergenerational communication in agriculture. So, what kind of piqued my interest in this uh, type of communication is I went on an install for a job, and on this install, we had to put a system into a farmer's uh, tractor, and on this job, we had to go through and explain how all the technology worked, and that technology gap was kind of hard to overcome. It was just something that you had to be aware of and know how to navigate. And that's what kind of piqued my interest in to put this question of what's the best way to have uh, communication between the generations. And this topic also, I have a farm at home that I'd like to go back to at some point, where we're going to be passing it down, and we need good communication between my grandparents and my parents and my uncles, so we can get a good communication going there, so we all understand and have a plan for the future. And I hope that everybody in this class can take something away from it, from this intergenerational communication, because uh, we all have to deal with people that are older than us, and it also includes people that are younger than us, and trying to communicate effectively with them. So let's define intergenerational communication. This applies to any interaction that involves individuals who are from a different age, cohorts or groups. And I found that from that was a site that was or a article that talked about intergenerational communication, and that was by Mary Lee Hummert. Um, this also on this slide we got a chart, which I thought was really interesting, because I don't follow the generations and the different ages and groups, but I thought that it was kind of interesting to see what the generations were when they were broken out into a chart, with the different years there. And I was interested to see that I was actually a Gen Z, which I was born in '98, so that would have been a Gen Z, and I kind of thought that I was a millennial, but apparently I missed the mark by a couple years there. So, all communication, as we've learned in this class, is all communication is just relationships. And as I said before, I want this to relate to everybody, because we all have grandparents, and we're all gonna meet with people in our jobs that are older than us and younger. So in ag, a lot of intergenerational communication starts and is on the family farm. So we'll talk about some succession plans and what that is, and this communication also can cover the day-to-day operations. Just deciding on who does what, and how the list of stuff gets done. So a lot of the issues with this intergenerational communication are technology. That's a big one, because there's been so many leaps and bounds in technology of just within the last 15 years. And so the older generation does have some computer illiteracy that doesn't work well with technology, and they have troubles with some of these cell phones and iPads and whatnot. It also Some of these generations are stubborn, and they don't want to accept the new technology. And we'll talk about that in another study that I have. And then you use it in communications for jobs, and as I said before, that example where I was doing an install. The average age of farmers is 57 years. It's 57 years old, and when you're trying to explain a brand new GPS system to them, and how to run it, it gets a little confusing on both sides, because they didn't grow up with the technology, and that that gap makes it hard for somebody who is a Gen Z to explain to one of the baby boomers. And so I know in this picture here that we all know somebody that is that looks at their phone like that every time. So one of the articles that I read for this deal was Bridging the Divide, and they did a study, and it was Dyke Haynes and Ferguson Mitchell all put this together. And what it was it was conducted by 24 students, and then they had a faculty member from a class, and they interviewed 60 individuals, and they went through and had in-depth conversations with them, and had a series of questions, and they went over those are the different generations that they had, and what they were looking at was the public perspective on intergenerational communication. And so some of the stuff that they found, which I thought was pretty interesting, was that the same generations had similar problems, which makes sense because they had the more similar backgrounds and just technology and what was going on in the same time frame. So that was kind of interesting. It also, another thing that I found interesting was that even though the different generations, once they found something mutual to talk about that they both liked, they were very highly involved with that, which also makes sense, because if you have something that you're both passionate about, it's a lot easier to talk about. And then the older generation tended to shun the more advanced forms of communication, such as texting and Snapchat and things of that sort, which also in turn affected the younger generations and made it harder for them to communicate, because they they weren't used to talking like or communicating in the same way. So another study that was more focused on family communication in rural settings was it looked at how the younger generation had communication problems, and that started from fewer family communication resources, and it in turn they had a lower family communication satisfaction, which all goes back to the different technology that was available during the times when they were growing up. And then another thing that was looked at, and this is actually a different article, but it looked at family farms, and so which is a big part of this intergenerational communication in ag, and this was a family farm communication and succession planning done by Kayla Waters, and she said that in this article, it said that the succession planning was a big source of communication difficulties. And so, let me define succession planning here first. It's just the process of identifying people to fill leadership positions within the farm or business as it's passed down from generation to generation. And it just identified these individuals so they can manage the operation appropriately. And this is a big source of communication difficulties because here the issue is the older generation didn't want to step aside, which is understandable. You've been doing it your whole life, and it's basically bred into you. But some of the solutions that they had in this article and this other article was that some of the solutions were to communicate and obviously, but look back and ask the correct questions on how to step this family farm down, and pass on a little more responsibility to the kids. And so one of the questions that most of them asked was, how do I make this fair? Because you got there's probably several kids in there. What's the fairest way to do it? And there's there's never a fair way to sort up and have a person that's in charge. But they also suggested that the older generation takes a step back and does it one step at a time and slowly transfer this decision making powers to the younger generation instead of just saying, "Yep, here you go." And a lot of the quotes that were in there had talked about the quotes from some of the older farmers that they said that they would start by giving the children one job and then two, and it was like, here, they're going to design this working facility, and then but there was also reluctance in there because they said that the older generation didn't. They're like, well, I would like him to do it on their own, but I've also been around the block, and so I'd like them to ask me, which made it hard. And so not all these solutions are gonna work. So there is a lot of there's more than one way to do this succession planning. And so these tensions of underpinning these family farm succession planning, that was what some of those quotes were from, and where these solutions came from. So basically, reviewing intergenerational communication, a big part of it is the technology gap, and how some of the older generations don't want to embrace text messages and everything of that sort. But if you can overcome that gap and talk to them about things that you both enjoy, it'll be very active conversation. And things to look at from an ag side is the family farm. Who's going to take it over, and the tensions there, and how good communication between generations makes a smoother transition. And then we also talked about how the jobs of communicating the different technologies to the older generations of farmers is a big thing to overcome. And with that, I think that is the end of my presentation. And here are some of the sources that I used. Thank you for listening.